this next question, I'm going to prep you right now. It's the English is not great, so just ignore it. It's a big rancher out in Wisconsin. I know who brought in this question, but his head and his heart are in the right place. I'll tell you, the guy's got 3 ranches with 25,000 head of cattle. He's no fool. Barry, thanks for the email. You're not the only one who's straight on your approach. Glad you're back on board direct with your in-your-face posts on something feels wrong. I, for one, missed it. All right, here's my question, and don't correct my English. The reappearance and the popularity of Vladimir Putin has been long overdue. Why can't this country follow suit and put forth a similar leader? Since Kennedy, this nation hasn't produced anyone other than elected jellyfish as our political representation. Jellyfish with a brain power similar to a barnacle at low tide located high on the piling. I respect this man's views. He's not butting into other countries' business. Let them solve it themselves, and when asked for assistance, it comes from a way of mutual agreement between opposing sides, kind of like mixing part A and part B, forming a strong epoxy. He ain't cramming his vodka down other people's throats who prefer to drink whiskey. We can't be the world's police department and never really was. I've watched some of his interviews and I hang my head in shame of what my nation has become. I see nations leaving mine and heading east. Ask Dmitry if he sees Putin making a mend here. It's obvious to me who's starting this dance. He seems to be the only one making sense anymore. Anyway, thanks and keep up the effort. That's actually not a bad question at all.
Yeah, it's a good question. Let me start at the beginning of the question. Why can't the United States have a leader like Putin? Well, Russia has what's called a presidential system. That's where people elect a president, not because he belongs to some party, not because some party put him up, but the parties are just completely secondary, but because it's an effective leader. And the leader's authority and power derive from his effectiveness and popularity. So he's directly answerable to the people. He's not answerable to the oligarchs. He's not answerable to the political establishment, although his job is to keep them in line. He is there to bring results for the people, the voters, directly in a single popular vote. The United States has this ridiculously gerrymandered system that basically makes sure that nobody's vote actually counts. And that's been going on for a long time. People have this idea in their heads that they're going to achieve something by voting. No, voting absolutely does not serve any purpose except legitimize the system in the eyes of the people. But the leaders it produces are basically all stooges. They're all hostages. So the president, no matter who the president is just a hostage in the White House. He and his family are basically held hostage by the Secret Service. And people like that, of course, can't achieve anything for the country at large. They're just going to serve whatever interests got them into power. So that's the first part of the answer.
Right.
And then as far as, how you engage with the rest of the world, well, here I think Putin is not a brilliant man. He's just a normal man. The way you engage with the world at large is by obeying international law and by involving yourself in detailed negotiations with friends and enemies alike. Keep all the conversations going in parallel. Russia talks to everybody, including its enemies, and basically try to be friends with everybody. So Russia has friendly relations with Saudi Arabia and Iran and Israel and Turkey and Syria all at the same time. And that is not an accident. That is done on purpose. And that's how you actually achieve positive things in the world, is by trying your hardest to be friends with absolutely everyone. So Russia is quite good at that. The American tactic of bullying everyone, that's not working anymore. But on the other hand, if they try to if they decided to try diplomacy, well, the U.S. doesn't have any diplomats. All the diplomats quit quite a while ago. They quit under George Bush Jr. over Iraq. So there's nobody competent left in the
Mm-hmm.
State Department.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's nobody to engage the world in a constructive way in the United States. So what the United States should really do is butt out. It's way on the other side of the world with Canada and Mexico for neighbors, and those aren't particularly threatening. So the U.S. can just withdraw to within its borders and nurse its wounds, which are mostly self-inflicted.
While that question was a bit rough in its delivery on my ranching buddy subscriber who since became a friend, I want to expand on that. And please let me provide a few facts, and I'd like you to expand on it. Putin seems near bulletproof to the afflictions that trouble most political leaders. 4 years ago, the citizens were reciting Russia without Putin throughout Moscow. Literally thousands lined the streets protesting what many called a choreographed reappearance to the presidency. Many felt the vote tampering was obvious during the parliamentary elections. His approval rating fell to its lowest in over a decade. It fell to 63%. Care to comment how he could still maintain a 63% approval rating with the above statement?
Oh, I don't believe those numbers really. The protesters who walked around with those little white ribbons, which
Mm-hmm.
were by the way, they were World War II vintage Nazi insignia of Nazi collaborators. That didn't really make it popular, but those people were basically this small cadre of people who survived by basically being paid on various types of Western government and NGO grants. Okay, they were basically paid political operatives, and most of the Russian population, the vast majority, was completely disgusted with them. Now, the elections, they weren't the cleanest elections in the world, but they were nowhere as near as corrupt as the U.S. elections. So by that standard, Russia is beautifully democratic. And there are some things to complain about, and they've been addressed since then. I think so that this next election that's going to happen in early September in Russia is probably going to be one of the cleanest. So these protests, really didn't affect Putin or his popularity or anything that much because of two things. One is that he's actually been doing a remarkably good job, and for that reason he's popular. And two, the operatives behind these protests, these Western financed, Western organized protests, lacked all legitimacy in the eyes of the Russian people. They were sort of a joke. Some people call them the one percenters because they could never get any more than 1% of the popular vote in any election. None of them could get elected to public office. None. And so they're really, it's sort of like wishful thinking to think that these efforts could have toppled Putin or something like that. That's just a ridiculous thought.
Observers see Putin's high approval ratings as a consequence of the significant improvements in living standards and Russia's reassertion of itself on a world scene that occurred during his tenure as president. On a poll taken back in July of '06, Russians overwhelmingly support the renationalization of Russia's oil and gas industries. Because of this, it was only natural for Russia and China merging together, forming strong trade agreements. Silk roads, oil, natural gas, food, and what's not often mentioned, but perhaps what might be most important of all, is potable water. According to www.circleofblue.org, and help me, Dmitry, if I mispronounce it, Lake Baikal, the world's
Baikal.
Baikal, thank you. The world's largest and deepest lake contains 20% of the global fresh water, whoa, and 80% of Russia's fresh water. Although the existing water infrastructure is largely outdated and much of it is polluted, still the access to safe drinking water currently runs at 100% in urban areas and a strong 88% in rural areas. Quoting Viktor Danilov, the director of Russia's Institute of Water Problems, says, Water may replace oil and gas as Russia's main source of revenue in the next 30 to 40 years. Dmitry, state your views on where this strong bonding of two global powers is heading, and in the future, what it entails for Western nations as a result.
Well, Russia and China are natural friends, and at least since the conclusion of World War II and the communist takeover of mainland China. What disrupted that friendship was Stalin's death and the appearance of Nikita Khrushchev, who was a remarkably incompetent person. And if we look back and decide who was it that actually did the most to doom the Soviet experiment, it was Nikita Khrushchev. He's the one who allowed the relationship with China to sour, and he's the one who provided Nixon with the opening to then fly to China and sign deals that cut out the Soviet Union. That was really the beginning of the end for it. So basically, the combination of Russia and China is completely invincible as far as the U.S. empire is concerned. And now that it's been restored, the U.S. is basically left, dreaming about world dominance, but actually unable to do anything about it. I think that the relationship between Russia and China is on every level. It's not just confined to this or that. There few people know this, but there are lots of Russians living in China, and there are a lot of Chinese living in Russia, studying and living. There are huge retirement communities full of Russians on the coast, Chinese coast, because it's a nice place to live that's relatively cheap. And so this is a very positive development for both countries. I think water is going to be important. Energy is going to be important. Russia's natural gas has allowed China to cut down very dramatically on the use of coal, and that has helped the environment quite a great deal. That's just one type of development. Another type of development is that Russia and China together are now more or less self-sufficient in terms of information infrastructure. The Chinese make the hardware, the Russians make some hardware too, and the Russians write a lot of the software. And together it's a winning combination. So lots of examples of that sort of thing going on.
Thank you. Dmitry, I have just two more questions for you. This one comes from a subscriber out in Spain. NATO's military bases installed near Russia's borders, ballistic missiles with nuclear capabilities. It's obvious who the aggressor is. However, what options remain for Putin to be able to protect his people yet not deliver what might be viewed upon as the first blow? He is purposely being backed into a corner. Any fool can see this.
Well, he's not really being backed into a corner. It's because any move by NATO would be a suicidal move, and because he's maintaining that position. So NATO can do whatever it wants to justify its existence short of actually doing anything against Russia. That's very clear. So what have the Russians done to make sure that any move against Russia is a suicidal move? Well, they have two things. First of all, the Russians talked about Star Wars and ballistic technology, but their stuff has never worked. The most recent systems that they're putting in, this Aegis Ashore system that's taken off a ship and stuck on land, brilliant move, in Romania, and the next one is in Poland, it's a bit of a joke. On the other hand, the Russians have been rolling out these very impressive air defense systems that can shoot things in near space as well. The S-500 is the next one that they're rolling out. And this basically will seal Russia's airspace against everything, be it bombers or missiles or what have you. The other type of development that Russia has done has to do with the ability to penetrate any air defense. So they have the Sarmat system, which is going to be produced and is being produced right now, which is a ballistic missile, intercontinental ballistic missile, but it's not ballistic. It flies. It's suborbital, and it doesn't just fly a predictable orbit. but it bobs and weaves, and it can take any arbitrary path around the planet to reach any destination anywhere on the planet. And it's fast enough, it's supersonic, so that it can't be intercepted. And then it has payloads that consist of other supersonic, hypersonic components that also can't be intercepted and can carry nuclear payloads. So that's just one example. Another one is that they've made these cruise missiles that are hypersonic, and the U.S. doesn't have anything comparable. They have a range of several thousand kilometers. They can be launched from relatively small ships or submarines anywhere in the world, and they can hit any point in the United States without the United States having the ability to intercept them or figure out that they exist before they hit. So with all of those things, if you attack Russia, you die. I mean, this is like the simplest way to explain it to Americans. If the United States attacks Russia, millions of Americans will be dead within 30 minutes. And so that is like the most important point to get through people's head.
I just want to quickly, before I go to my final question, add on 2 points I want you to touch, if you don't mind. One, I feel from my limited studying, Russia's military is actually more of a defensive mode. They're not looking to attack, but they sure can if they need to. But it's basically on a defensive mode. And secondly, even though the U.S. spends countless numbers higher, they're really feeding the pockets of the owners of these weapons companies because they're not really making state of the art. Like, I mean, the day of the aircraft carrier's history. I mean, that was impressive in World War II and what have you, but now it's small. Technology is small, not large. Do you agree with those?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the thing to realize, first of all, is if you look at dollar amounts and convert rubles to dollars to figure it out, you end up with just a completely ridiculous picture. Because what you have to look at instead is purchasing parity. And it turns out that when the Russians spend a unit of money on defense, they get 10 times the value of Americans for a variety of reasons. Too many to list here. But if you take purchasing parity into account, it turns out that Russia has a bigger military budget than the United States. So that's one very impressive fact. And the other one is that a lot of what the U.S. spends money on is just all kinds of ridiculous stuff. Like you mentioned the aircraft carriers. Well, the Russians at one point thought that the U.S. aircraft carrier fleet might pose some kind of a problem. So they developed supersonic torpedo technology, supercavitating torpedoes that fly through water at above the speed of sound of things in the air. And there's no way to intercept them, and they can take out an aircraft carrier from great distance. The Iranians have bought some of them and even modernized some of them. So against countries like Russia and China and Iran, aircraft carriers are useless. You can see that because as soon as the Russian action started in Syria, what was the first thing that Americans did? They instantly withdrew their one remaining aircraft carrier from the Persian Gulf because they didn't want to lose it. It's like this big fragile thing, and if it gets sunk, then that's a big hole in their budget. That's all they care about. They don't care about winning because they know they're never going to fight.
Dmitry, my final question, and it's coming from myself, both as an author and as a blogger, what was the turning point that inspired you to take on the bold task, the daily commitment of informing the public?
I sort of grew into it. I enjoy writing, and I think it shows. I think that's the reason.
Absolutely.
I think the reason people like to read what I write is not even so much that I tell them lots of useful things. I try to, but I think what's even more important is that I enjoy doing it, and there's kind of a level of sanity to life if you enjoy what you do. So it's not some kind of a chore for me. It's what I enjoy doing, and that's the simplest answer I can give you.
I appreciate that. Dmitry, as always, it's a pleasure when we get a chance to chat together. In closing, tell all of our viewers about your upcoming, soon-to-be released new book, Shrinking the Technosphere, and the best way for them to stay in the loop with Club Orlov.
Well, to stay in the loop with Club Orlov, just go to Club Orlov every Tuesday. That's when I publish. It's cluborlov.blogspot.com. And everything I do is online, so it's pretty easy to find. As far as the book, we're finishing up the editing right now. In fact, I'm almost done with the final chapter. The book will be out in November, and it's really about technology, not in any kind of a Luddite way, but looking at technologies that are beneficial versus harmful, looking at what technologies are stable and can be perpetuated and which will have to be abandoned, looking at ways we can make ourselves independent from the technologies that we shouldn't really be relying on. It's all in that book.
Dmitry, a sincere thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Barry.
This is Barry and DR for the drescapes.com and somethingfeelswrong.com. Websites saying until next time.